out of this crust. Chapter 1. Welcome to Millhaven. Danny hadn't slept. The bus's GPS had refused the entire ride to recognize Millhaven as an actual place. The town, as far as any map or app Danny had ever consulted was concerned, simply did not exist. And the driver, after 2 failed reroutes and 1 long sigh, had finally pulled over at an unmarked crossroads and told him, not unkindly, that this was as close as the bus went. "There's a town 2 miles that way," the driver said, pointing down a stretch of cracked 2-lane road with no signage of any kind. "Or there was, last I heard." The bus pulled away in a cloud of dust thick enough to chew, and Danny stood there coughing hard enough that he couldn't see 2 feet in front of him, swearing at the taillights in language that would have gotten him banned from most of the establishments he'd grown up around. So he walked 2 miles, 1 suitcase with a wheel that had given up somewhere around mile 1, and now shrieked against the asphalt like a small, ongoing accusation, his phone held up over his head the entire way, arm locked straight, chasing a single bar of signal that flickered in and out like it was thinking about giving up entirely. He'd been holding the pose for the better part of a mile. He went up on his toes. It didn't help. He was seriously, if briefly, considering whether his molars had enough metal in them to function as a satellite dish. By the time the rusted hulk of what used to be the Millhaven Steelworks finally rose up out of the heat haze, a building so large it seemed to have its own weather system, all broken windows and pigeons and 1 lonely American flag still bolted to a smokestack, faded pink from the sun. Danny's arm had gone fully numb, and the suitcase wheel had stopped shrieking only because it had, at some point in the last quarter mile, simply fallen off entirely. The sign at the edge of town used to say, "Welcome to Millhaven, home of American steel." Somebody had spray painted over steel years ago, and nobody had bothered to fix it. Now it just said, "Welcome to Millhaven, home of American." Population 2,314. Danny read off the sign, arm still raised, out loud, to nobody. Down from... He didn't finish the thought. The sign hadn't either, and somehow that felt like the whole town's biography. A pigeon on top of the sign looked at him, looked at his upraised arm. Danny took a step closer, more out of spite than curiosity, and the pigeon, startled, flapped off the sign and left behind a single, unmistakable splash of white directly in his path. Danny looked down at it, looked back up at the empty patch of sign where the pigeon had been, and lowered his arm at last, blood returning to his fingers in a slow, unpleasant tingle. "Yeah," he said, to nobody. "Fair." Grandma Rosa's pizzeria sat on the corner of Mill Street and 4th, in a building that had been a hardware store, a dentist's office, and, according to Grandma, briefly, a man who set up a cart out front selling combs in a town that was, I want to say, 70% bald men, terrible businessman, very confident though. The sign out front was hand-painted, chipped at the corners, and said simply, "Rosa's." Underneath, in smaller letters, "Best pizza in town." Danny had been coming here every summer since he was 7, alone these last few years, ever since his mom's mineral research started sending her out to sites too remote for anything but a satellite phone and a mule train. She'd grown up in the shadow of the mill, back when it still ran, and something about that, rock and ore and the guts of the earth, the very thing that had built this town and then abandoned it, had apparently never let go of her, even after there was no mill left to explain the fascination. She'd simply found her own way to keep chasing it, long after Millhaven itself had stopped. He was 26 now, and the smell hit him the second he opened the door. Wood smoke, garlic, something warm and yeasty that he'd never once been able to replicate no matter how many videos he watched. The door handle wobbled in his grip before he even turned it, the metal giving off a thin, rattling jiggle, like it was one good tug away from coming off in his hand entirely. He caught it, held it steady, and pushed the door open with his shoulder instead. Grandma Rosa was elbow deep in a mound of dough, a woman barely 5'2", with white hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it was trying to escape her scalp. She had to be, 80, 85? Nobody actually knew, including, Danny suspected, Grandma Rosa. She didn't turn around. "Grandma, you haven't asked anyone to fix this doorknob? It's basically falling off. I can look at it. It's probably a 2-minute fix." "No, not a beat of hesitation. Don't touch it." "I'm serious. I can tighten the screws, maybe replace the whole—" "Your grandpa installed that." Her hands didn't slow down in the dough. "Don't touch it." "He installed it, 40 years ago? It's a doorknob, Grandma, not a—" "Don't touch it, Daniel." He let go of the handle like it had gotten warmer in his hand. There was something in the way she said it. Not sharp, exactly. Just final. The tone of a rule that had never once needed a second sentence to enforce itself. "You're late," she added, in her normal voice, like the last 30 seconds hadn't happened. "The bus didn't stop in town. Not anymore, apparently. You don't need Wi-Fi. And the bus stopped coming into town about a year ago, by the way. Nobody tells anybody anything around here. Give it another year, they'll probably cancel the route entirely. That bus company's about as old as we are." She wiped her hands on her apron. "You need to wash your hands and grab an apron." "I'm on vacation." "You're in my restaurant." She finally turned around, flour on her nose, and looked at him the way she'd looked at him since he was 7, like she could see something in him that he couldn't. "Vacation is a place. This is a kitchen." By hour 3, Danny had come to a professional conclusion. His grandmother's restaurant was operating in the year 1974, and it showed no particular interest in leaving. There was no point-of-sale system. There was a shoebox. There was no online ordering, no delivery app, no Yelp page that Grandma acknowledged the existence of. "People write nasty things about my sauce, and I am supposed to care?" Orders were taken on a paper pad with a pencil tied to a string, like a library due date card from the Cold War. Danny had noticed, somewhere around the second box of mozzarella, that people had 2 entirely different words for the same amount of age. Old things people wanted, they called vintage. Old things people didn't, they called rusted. Nobody had invented a word yet for something that was stubbornly, simply both. And looking around the shop, at the paper pad and the shoebox and the walls that had clearly not been touched since before he was born, Danny had a growing suspicion that his grandmother's restaurant was exactly that. Not vintage, not rusted, just old in the plain and total sense of the word, the way a mountain is old. "You're leaving money on the table," Danny said, looking around at the 9 empty tables. "You could turn this into something people actually plan a trip for if you just knocked out that wall." "That wall is load-bearing. It's a pizzeria, Grandma, not a palace." "Everything is a palace if you build it right." She slid a pizza out of the wood-fired oven with a paddle that looked older. "You want to help? take that box of mozzarella to the walk-in. Don't touch the thermostat. Don't touch anything with a plug in it." Danny picked up the box and noticed, not for the first time, but for the first time he let himself really notice, that whoever did still walk through that door handed their money to a shoebox without a second thought. And it took him a moment to understand why. There was nowhere else left to go. Millhaven used to have a sandwich shop on 2nd, a little Italian place that did fresh pasta on Fridays, a taco stand by the old rail crossing that Danny half remembered from childhood summers. One by one, over the years, they'd all closed. Not dramatically. No one restaurant's closing had ever been news. They'd just quietly stopped being there, the way teeth fall out of an old comb. Rosa's hadn't survived because it had cracked some secret. Rosa's had survived because everything around it hadn't. And lately, Danny was starting to suspect, not by a very wide margin. Danny stayed in the pizza shop the whole day, and by closing time, they'd only served 2 orders. 2 orders a day would have sunk any restaurant Danny had ever studied in a business textbook. In the financial models he'd built in school, a shop with numbers like these was what his professors would have called a dead position, over-leveraged, structurally unsound, a case where risk management said cut your losses and walk. There was no model Danny knew of that survived a single load-bearing wall vetoing the entire renovation plan on principle, and yet here they still were, 60-some years running, a single stubborn variable that refused to resolve to zero no matter how Danny ran the numbers in his head. But then, he was beginning to notice Grandma Rosa didn't run her life like anything out of a textbook. She grew most of what she cooked with in a garden out back that took up nearly the whole lot behind the shop. She didn't own a microwave, a dishwasher, or, as far as Danny could tell, anything with a screen. The water came from a well that predated the mill itself. 2 orders, to a woman with almost no expenses to speak of, apparently went a very long way. Out past the edge of town, where the old rail line curved along the water, the lake lay flat and black under a moonless sky. The kind of still that a body of water only holds right before something disturbs it. Something disturbed it. A single point on the surface buckled inward, without sound, without wind, and folded closed again over itself, sending a slow ring of ripples out toward the reeds. No splash reached the shore, no bird startled. The water simply closed over the place where, a moment before, there had been nothing at all, and then, quietly, kept rippling. The ripples were still moving, somewhere out past the edge of town, when a much smaller version of the same disturbance happened 40 feet from a kitchen sink. A glass dipped into a basin of dishwater, and the water inside it went still, and in its wobbling surface sat a reflection. Danny's face, bent slightly out of shape, wearing a drinking glass where his mouth should be. "Danny, are you okay?" Rosa asked him. Danny, unable to answer with a full glass affixed to his face, simply pointed at his own mouth with both hands, eyes wide. "Oh, let me help you." Grandma Rosa turned around and saw the full picture, her grandson's entire mouth, somehow, wedged inside the cup. She gripped the glass with both hands and pulled it free from his face in one clean, practiced motion, like uncorking a bottle. It took several minutes for Danny to recover, though his mouth stayed swollen, roughly the size and color of a sausage, for a good while after. "It was hot," he said, with as much dignity as a man can manage with a sausage for a lip. "I was just trying to get a glass of water, and somehow I compared my mouth and the cup's size, which is bigger, and I got stuck in the cup." He paused, then added, a little defensively, "There's no signal out here. A person gets bored." His fingers still tapped on the glass. Grandma Rosa said nothing, which was somehow worse than anything she could have said, and went back to the dishes. That night, unable to sleep, jet-lagged, overheated, and mildly concussed by the volume of garlic in his bloodstream, Danny wandered down for a glass of water and found Grandma Rosa standing in the backyard in her robe, alone, staring straight up at the sky. Not stargazing, not the pleasant, unfocused up-glance of someone enjoying a summer night. She was staring, completely still, the way a dog stares at a door when it hears a key in the lock 3 houses down. "Grandma?" She didn't jump. She didn't even blink right away. "Go to bed, Daniel." "What are you looking at?" A pause, just slightly too long. "Stars," she said. "You have stars in the city?" "Not really, no." "Too bad." She kept looking up. "Go to bed." He went, but on his way back inside, he caught, just faintly, a smell that had no business being in his grandmother's backyard. Some kinds of prosperity only exist inside a museum now, or written down in a history textbook, whole eras that vanish like dust slipping out of your hands. Ozone, the only thing left of those eras. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. Chapter 2. Rumors spread like wildfire. By Wednesday, half of Millhaven had seen it, and the other half knew someone who had. Old Man Pruitt, who ran the hardware store, the actual hardware store, the one that hadn't been turned into a pizzeria, swore it was a silent black triangle, hovering, no engine noise, nothing. Mrs. Okafor from the church choir said it was more of a shimmer, like heat off a road, except it was 10 o'clock at night and 40 degrees. The Delgado twins, age 9, said it was a spaceship shaped like a Dorito and would not be moved from this position under any amount of adult questioning. What everyone agreed on was this: something had been over Millhaven 3 nights running. It made no sound, and it did not show up on anybody's phone camera, which somehow made it more believable, not less. If it was fake, reasoned Deb at the diner, kids would have faked a video by now. Nobody here is good enough to fake things. Danny, to his own mild embarrassment, could not let it go. He told himself it was healthy skepticism. A UFO story spreading through a town this size, this fast, with this little actual evidence, was, statistically, almost certainly a drone, a weather balloon, ball lightning, or 40 people feeding off each other's imaginations in the specific way that happens in towns where nothing has happened in a long, long time. He'd read the studies. Mass sightings clustered. It was a known phenomenon. He was almost sure of this, which is why, on Thursday night, he found himself lying on the flat part of the pizzeria's roof, with his phone propped against a brick, running nothing more exotic than the camera's built-in night mode, waiting. At 11:47 p.m., something happened. It wasn't dramatic. There was no light show, no hovering triangle, no dramatic bass hum. There was just, for about 4 seconds, a patch of sky roughly the size of a football field that had no stars in it, not clouded over, not dark the way sky with no stars is normally dark. Just absent, like a piece had been cut out of the picture and nobody had bothered to fill in the background. Danny sat up so fast he nearly rolled off the roof. He grabbed his phone, hands shaking, and looked at the screen. Every star was right there on the recording, sitting exactly where it should be. The same patch of sky that, a second ago, with his own two eyes, he'd watched go completely blank. Whatever had blotted out that piece of sky, the camera hadn't seen it at all. "That's impossible," he said, out loud, to the empty roof. "Get down from there before you break your neck," said a voice below him. "And then come inside. I need help with the register tape." Grandma Rosa was standing in the alley below, arms crossed, not remotely surprised to find her grandson lying on the roof at midnight with a phone. She did not ask what he was doing. She did not ask what he saw. Danny climbed down, looking back up at the sky for a few seconds longer than he needed to. "Come inside," came Rosa's voice from somewhere near the door. Danny pressed his mouth shut, in the dark, and said nothing at all. By Friday, Millhaven had become, against a century of precedent, an internet-famous place to be. Nobody could ever quite produce a photo or a clip, but the story itself had spread far enough on its own. Word of mouth turned into forum threads, turned into somebody's cousin's group chat, that a tour bus, chartered from 2 counties over, was now running a Millhaven UFO loop that included the water tower, the old steelworks, rebranded overnight as the landing site, despite zero evidence anything had landed there, and Rosa's Pizzeria, listed on the flyer as a local landmark. Try the Alien Special, next to a clip art pizza that had been redrawn into an oval UFO, complete with a little gray alien face peering out from underneath it, 2 enormous black eyes, and no expression whatsoever. Danny nearly choked on his own coffee. He got himself mostly back under control, then made the mistake of reading the caption a second time and slid clean off his kitchen chair. There was no Alien Special. There had never been an Alien Special. By Saturday morning, 4 different customers asked for one, and Grandma Rosa, without missing a beat, told each of them, "Comes with extra cheese and a strong disinclination to discuss politics," and charged them the same as a regular pizza, and every single one of them left a 5-star review on a Yelp page she still claimed didn't exist. "How did you turn a pizza shop into an alien pizza shop overnight?" Danny said, still on the floor. "You've accidentally invented a marketing campaign." "I invented a pizza, but your dead grandpa liked alien sci-fi, so this is just how it goes now." The town meeting was held that same Friday night in the high school gym, which still had a banner from 1987 congratulating the Millhaven Miners on a district championship nobody currently living could remember watching. Roughly 300 people showed up, which was more than had shown up for the last mayoral election combined. The mayor, a tired, decent man named Gary Pell, who ran an insurance office and had not signed up for any of this, tried to open with a calming statement about likely meteorological phenomena, and was booed, gently but firmly, by an audience that had already decided this was the most interesting thing to happen to Millhaven since the mill closed in '94 and was not about to let a weather explanation ruin it. "We should call the news," someone shouted. "We should call the Air Force," someone else corrected. Old Man Pruitt stood up on his folding chair, which nobody had asked him to do. "I'll tell you what it was. A silent black triangle, hovering, no engine noise. And you know the last time this town went quiet like that at night? Before the mill put in the new furnaces. Before the noise. I was 19. He said it like an accusation, though nobody could say against what. You'd stand out on your porch, and the whole sky over the works would go orange, all night, every night. Made your own weather, that place did. Haven't seen the sky do anything worth looking at since." "It's not the same thing, Walt," Mrs. Okafor said, gently, and for a second the gym went quiet in a different way. Not bored, not restless, just briefly, collectively remembering something. "But I know what you mean. I haven't seen this many people out past 9 o'clock on a Thursday since the shift change crowds used to come through my mother's diner. Didn't matter what it was for. It's been a long time since something happened to us instead of something just leaving." "We should sell parking," said a man Danny recognized as owning the empty lot behind the old bank, and a few people laughed, but not unkindly, because underneath the joke was the same thing Pruitt and Mrs. Okafor had just said out loud. That Millhaven had spent 30 years watching outsiders take industry away from it. And if the universe was finally sending them something instead of taking something for once, some part of this town intended to hold on to it with both hands, whatever it turned out to be. Gary Pell, sensing correctly that the meeting had slipped entirely out of his hands and deciding to at least steer the runaway cart, cleared his throat into the microphone. "The town council will be looking into some kind of a festival, is the word people keep using. A proper one. Give it 3 weeks. Give people something organized to be excited about, instead of," he gestured weakly at the general chaos of the gym, "this." The gym cheered like the mill had just reopened. Danny scanned the crowd for his grandmother. She was near the back, arms crossed, saying nothing, watching the whole spectacle with an expression Danny couldn't quite place. They walked home together, well past midnight, past the dead streetlights and the shuttered storefronts with new UFO merchandise taped hopefully in the windows. "How do you think about aliens, Grandma?" Danny asked, falling into step behind her. Grandma Rosa hadn't looked curious, or frightened, not exactly. "Yeah, weird, right?" Danny went on, eyes mostly on his phone, thumbing at a signal that wasn't there. "I don't even know if I believe they're real. Aliens. It all sounds so far away from us." Rosa turned her head toward him for a moment, then turned it back to the road ahead. She'd looked like a woman watching a slow-moving car she recognized finally turn the corner onto her street. Chapter 3. The Grandson's Discovery. The gym was packed twice as full as it had really been, and everyone was shouting at once. Half the crowd was chanting there were aliens, the other half chanting back there were no aliens, louder and louder, until the two chants blurred into one meaningless noise, and the folding chairs started tipping over on their own. Danny pushed into the middle of it, arms out, shouting, "Stop! Stop!" And nobody stopped, and nobody even looked at him, until, from somewhere above the bleachers, a ripple of laughter started. He looked up. The aliens were laughing at him, not menacing, not even unkind, just genuinely, helplessly amused, the way you'd laugh at a dog chasing its own tail. And somehow that was so much worse than being afraid of them. "Stop," Danny said again, quieter now, and the laughter only got louder. He woke at 2 a.m., heart going, the word stop still half out of his mouth. "Oh, it was a dream," Danny breathed hard. It took him another moment, lying there in the dark, to notice how quiet the house was. Too quiet, the specific quiet of a house with one less person breathing in it than there should be. He got up for a glass of water and found the kitchen empty and the back door standing open. He found her in the cellar. Not the part of the cellar where the flour and canned tomatoes lived. Behind that, through a door he'd always assumed led to a crawl space, in a room he had genuinely never seen in 19 years of summers. The room was small, dry, and humming faintly, lit by a soft blue light coming from something the approximate size and shape of a chest freezer, except it had no cord, no plug, and was covered in symbols that made Danny's eyes slide sideways when he tried to look directly at them, the way a word looks wrong if you stare at it too long, except infinitely worse. Grandma Rosa was sitting on an overturned bucket next to it, in her robe, holding a mug of what smelled like chamomile tea, talking to the freezer-shaped object in a language that had entirely too many syllables for the 2 seconds it took her to say them. Grandma. She didn't jump. She never jumped. Danny was starting to understand why. You should be asleep, she said, not turning around. Grandma, what is that? It's rude to point. That's not a thing you point at. That's a... Danny's mouth kept moving without producing useful words, which felt, at the moment, like an appropriate response to the situation. Is that the UFO? UFO. There is a very small part of it. Sit down, you'll want to sit down, and don't touch the console. He sat on the floor. Because there was no other chair, and because his legs had independently decided this was the correct course of action. Grandma Rosa took a long sip of her tea, looked at her grandson for a moment, the way she used to when he was small, and had asked her something about death, or live, or why the mill closed. The look of someone deciding how much truth a person could actually carry. And then she told him. She was looking into the tea for a second. She was not from Millhaven. She was not, strictly speaking, from this state, this country, or this planet. 60-some years ago, give or take, your calendar and my calendar have an understanding, not an agreement. She had been an ordinary young woman on a planet whose name did not translate cleanly into English, but which she'd taken to calling, privately, home, in the specific tone people use for a place they have complicated feelings about. Home had extraordinary technology, faster than light travel, medicine that could regrow a limb over a long weekend, buildings that rearrange their own floor plans based on mood. Home also had, by universal and tragic design, the worst food in the observable galaxy. Nutrient paste, she said, with the same disgust 40 years had failed to dull. Gray, precisely measured, zero flavor by law. Flavor was decided generations ago to be inefficient, a distraction. You eat, you are nourished, you move on with your important, efficient life. She made a noise Danny had never heard her make before, something between a scoff and a small, private grief. I was eating gray paste for breakfast, lunch, and dinner in a very advanced, very intelligent civilization that had figured out star travel and had never once, not once, figured out that food could simply also be good. And then, one day, she said, a probe, a small, unremarkable listening probe, the interstellar equivalent of a satellite dish, pointed idly at a signal nobody expected to matter. She turned the mug in her hands. It picked up a broadcast. What kind of broadcast? A cooking show. She almost smiled. Earth, mid-century. A man in an apron, on what I'm told was a very early public television station, showing a studio audience how to stretch dough by hand, ladle on tomato sauce, slide the whole thing into a wood-fired oven. That's it? That's what started all this? I saw the cheese, Grandma Rosa said, simply, and I knew my life had a goal now, to find the cheese. Danny looked at her, a little stunned. Cheese? But Grandma, you have a pizza shop, not a cheese shop. Ha ha, well, Grandma Rosa gave him a small, weird smile. Something got a little lost along the way. She had not asked permission. She had, in fact, specifically not asked permission, correctly guessing that no review board back home would authorize an unscheduled 15-light-year joyride for the express purpose of trying a snack. She borrowed a small scout vessel. Borrowed, we'll say borrowed, and set a course for Earth, intending to taste cheese exactly once, take detailed notes, and return before anyone noticed the ship, or her, were gone. The ship's stabilizer core failed on final approach, she said, somewhere over what was, back then, a much busier, much noisier Millhaven. She said it lightly, like she was reading it off a grocery list. Wait, it just broke? Mid-flight? Spectacularly. I spent 3 days trying to fix it with parts I did not have, in a language the ship did not speak, which is a very long way of saying I hit it a lot and swore in a language you don't know. Danny let out a short, disbelieving laugh. And then what? Then I gave up, hid the ship, walked into town. She shrugged, like this part barely counted as a decision at all. I had good disguise technology and an even better sense of local fashion. I looked exactly like a young woman who'd just moved to the area. So you just walked in? I walked in, she agreed, and I ordered a slice of pizza, which was the thing full of cheese. And, Danny said, because he had to know how the slice itself had gone. Best decision I ever made. I met your grandpa. He paid for that slice of pizza, the best food and the best people. Of course, Danny said. The repair had turned into a long project. Parts had turned into decades. She'd filed. She showed him the paperwork, actual paperwork, in the alien equivalent of a manila folder, for what amounted to an extended repair and return authorization, and then simply stayed, long enough to fall properly in love with Frank, who ran the mill's payroll office and never once suspected a thing, long enough to raise a daughter who grew up and had a son of her own, long enough to become, in every practical sense that mattered, a woman from Millhaven who happened to also secretly be from somewhere else. The ship in the sky, Danny said slowly. That's not an invasion. It's a tow truck, said Grandma Rosa. 60 years is apparently a very normal wait time for an intergalactic repair ticket. I filed a complaint every decade. Nobody ever answers those either, wherever you are in the universe. So, they're here to fix the ship. They're here, she said, and for the first time all night, her voice wavered, just slightly, to take me home. So, Chapter 4. Please hold. You want to see it? Grandma Rosa asked. Really see it? Not just the box humming in the corner, the actual call. Danny, still sitting on the cellar floor, still fairly sure he was dreaming, said the only thing that felt true. Yes. No, he added, half a second later, already regretting it. Too late, the call's already going through. Grandma Rosa didn't even look up. Don't say I didn't warn you. She set down her tea, wiped her hands on her robe, and pressed her palm flat against a panel on the freezer-shaped console that Danny would have sworn, a second earlier, hadn't been there at all. The blue light inside it brightened, then steadied, then split itself into a shape. Not quite a screen, not quite a hologram, more like a window that had opinions about what it wanted to show. A tone sounded, then another. Then, after a pause, just long enough to be insulting, a third. Are they not going to answer? Danny whispered. Oh, they'll answer. Grandma Rosa didn't look up. Eventually, they always answer eventually. That's the whole design. On the fourth tone, the light resolved into a face that could have belonged to anyone standing in line at the DMV, perfectly ordinary, perfectly human in every visible respect, which was somehow more unsettling than anything stranger could have been. Only the voice gave it away, flat and clipped, the universal register of someone reading from a script they had read 10,000 times before. Repair and return, case number 6,204B. Please state your designation. It's Rosa, said Grandma Rosa. You know it's Rosa. You've known it's Rosa for 60 years. Please state your designation, the face repeated, with the patience of a machine that had never once in its existence needed patience, because it had never once in its existence felt anything else. Then all at once, it dropped the register entirely. Okay, hello, Rosa. I just wanted to be formal. Earth's language is cool. A pause, oddly chipper. What's up, Rosa? Have you decided when to come back? Grandma Rosa blinked, apparently as thrown by this as Danny was. Since when do you say, what's up? I have been monitoring your local broadcasts for cultural calibration purposes. It is very fun. Another pause, and then the flat register snapped back on like a switch had been flipped. Case escalated. A retrieval vessel was dispatched 11 cycles ago and is now within final approach range of your location. Please confirm you are prepared for immediate departure. Danny, off to the side, mouthed the words, 11 cycles, at nobody in particular. The vessel is also carrying your requested replacement components, the board added. Structural coolant regulators, calibration units, full itemized list already on file. And installation? Grandma Rosa asked, in the tone of someone who already knew the answer and was asking anyway, out of habit, like checking a door you know is locked. Installation and labor remain a separately billable service, per your account status. A pause, the audio equivalent of flipping a page. Your file still shows you marked as declined service, as of cycle 40. Because the rate was extortionate in cycle 40, Grandma Rosa said, and I'd be very surprised if it's gotten cheaper. The board does not set labor rates. The board only reads them to you. Then I'll do it myself, same as the coolant valve in cycle 12, same as the hull seal in cycle 26, same as every single thing on this ship since the day it landed. Noted, the board said, quieter this time, as if even it understood there wasn't much more worth adding to that. I have some things to finish first, Grandma Rosa said. Case number 6204-B has been open for 61 of your Earth years. The board respectfully notes that some things to finish was also your stated position in cycles 9, 14, 22, and 40. The board can respectfully note whatever it likes. There was a pause. The first one, Danny thought, that felt less like protocol and more like the alien equivalent of a raised eyebrow. May the board inquire as to the nature of the delay. Grandma Rosa glanced just for a second toward the stairs, toward the kitchen, the ovens, the whole shop breathing quietly above their heads, and then back at the screen. Work, she said. I run a small business. Noted. Another stamp. Oh, also, just so you remember, nothing from Earth comes back with you. No food, no plants, no dirt, nothing you've grown or made or cooked. That's still the rule. Hasn't changed in 400 cycles, and it's not going to change for you. Grandma Rosa's jaw tightened, just barely. A small, controlled flash of something Danny hadn't seen from her before, gone again almost before he could name it. "Understood," she said. "The ship should reach you in about 2-3 weeks, your time. And listen, if you're still down there after it arrives, that's not just late anymore. That's a Class 2 infraction. I don't make the categories, I just read them to you." A beat. "Anyway, good luck with whatever it is you do down there." The light dimmed. Then, a second later, it flickered back on, not with a new tone, just a stray, half-connected crackle, the audio equivalent of a phone left face up on a table. The food here is pretty good," said a voice that wasn't the same one as before. "Yes, I told you, especially, I went and ordered from Rosa's today," said a second voice. "Can we bring some pizza back home?" "No, of course not." A pause. "But if no one notices, maybe." Danny and Grandma Rosa looked at each other. Whoever was on the other end of that call had clearly forgotten it was still connected, and was, at this very moment, somewhere out among the stars, comparing notes on toppings. Grandma Rosa reached over and ended the call herself this time, shaking her head slowly, and it was somehow that detail, not the countdown, not the quarantine law, not the word infraction, that felt to Danny like the least reassuring thing he'd heard all evening. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. "They talk to you like that every time?" Danny finally asked. "Every time." Grandma Rosa picked her tea back up, found it cold, drank it anyway. "It's not unkind, it's just efficient. Everything is efficient, I told you. That thing about the quarantine, about not being able to bring anything back, I heard it the same as you did." "Grandma? 2 to 3 weeks, Daniel." She stood, knees cracking, robe pulled tight around her like armor. "That's a conversation for a different night. Tonight you're going to help me get some sleep before either of us says something we mean." She turned off the console with the same flat, unceremonious gesture she used to turn off the oven. A little too quickly, Danny thought, for someone who claimed this was nothing new. She didn't look at him again before she climbed the stairs. It was the closest thing to running away he had ever seen her do. A faint electrical hum lingered from the console, making the quiet in the room feel even quieter. Danny sat alone in the cellar for a while after that, in a room that still smelled faintly of ozone and old tea. A long time later, he turned off the light and went upstairs. Chapter 5. It never rains, but it pours. 2 men in matching windbreakers arrived in Millhaven on Tuesday, driving a van marked Regional Power and Light, Regional Survey Unit, which would have been convincing if the power company had ever, in its history, sent 2 men in sunglasses to knock on doors asking about unusual electromagnetic readings. Before they'd even gotten out of the car, one of them crossed that phrase off the clipboard entirely and wrote, above it in blocky capital letters, "Wi-Fi installation." They went with that instead, and then, almost as an afterthought, jotted down how long each household had lived at their current address, like it was just a box to check on a form. Danny clocked them within the hour, partly because he was, for the first time in his life, actively looking for something out of place, and partly because the taller of the two introduced himself as Agent Miller, Regional Survey, then, 3 sentences later, as Mr. Miller from the power company, then, without missing a beat, corrected himself again. "No, sorry, Mr. Miller, from the Star Internet Company, and did not appear to notice he'd said 3 different things. "They're suspicious," Danny told Grandma Rosa that evening, low over the empty tables, watching Miller and his shorter, quieter partner order 2 slices and eat them with the enthusiasm of men who had not budgeted time in their op for enjoying anything. Or something like feds, Homeland Security maybe, or worse. "There's a worse than Homeland Security?" "I don't know, Grandma. I've never been in this situation before. Only from movies." Grandma Rosa did not look up from the dough she was folding. They found the signal, same as my people did. It was never going to be a secret forever, not once the ship started transmitting a return beacon. "So, what do? We close up. Then we figure out how to keep 2 very determined strangers with government badges from finding a repair vessel hidden inside the old Millhaven steelworks." Danny almost choked again. "It's where?" "It has excellent structural cover, and nobody questions why the ground is always warm in winter. Eat your slice. You look too skinny." Danny grabbed 2 slices and shoved them both into his mouth at once, which felt, under the circumstances, like the correct amount of dignity to bring to the conversation. The agents were, it turned out, part of something called, on paper at least, on the one badge Danny managed to get an accidental half-second look at, the Office of Non-Terrestrial Materiel Acquisition, a name so aggressively bureaucratic that Danny almost admired it. Their mission, as far as he could piece together from overheard phone calls in the pizzeria parking lot, and one badly hidden folder Miller left on his table for 4 minutes while getting a refill, was straightforward and unoriginal. Locate the craft, secure the technology, and, this part they were somewhat less public about, secure whoever, or whatever, was operating it. "They don't know it's you specifically," Danny said, that night, back in the secret cellar, now regularly his second favorite room in the house. "They know there's a craft. They don't know Grandma Rosa from Rosa's Pizzeria is the alien." "They will," said Grandma Rosa, unbothered, refilling a coolant line on the freezer-shaped console with what appeared to be a turkey baster. "Give them a week. Men like that always find the thing eventually. It's what they're for." "That's not comforting." "It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be true." She wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him properly for the first time that night. "Daniel, I need you to understand something, because you are the only person in this town I can say it to. If they find the ship before my people do, they will not ask politely. They will take the ship. They will take whatever they can get out of me, and they will make sure nobody in Millhaven ever asks a single question about any of it again. That is not a guess. That is a pattern. I have read the reports. Every civilization writes the same report eventually." Danny sat with that for a moment, in a cellar under a pizzeria, next to a very old woman and a machine that smelled faintly of ozone and turkey basting. "Okay," he said finally, "so we don't let them find it first." Grandma Rosa smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her all week, and handed him the turkey baster. "Good. Hold this. Don't let go no matter what it does." It hummed. Danny held on. Chapter 6. Efficiency. A lie. The fight happened on a Wednesday over, of all things, a Wi-Fi router. Danny had bought it in secret, driven 40 minutes to the nearest Best Buy, installed it in the back office while Grandma Rosa was closing out the register. reasoning with the airtight logic of a man who had spent 3 weeks watching his grandmother run a business on a shoebox and a pencil, that if the agents were tracking electromagnetic signatures, a little extra background noise from a modern router might actually help hide the ship's signal, not expose it. He had a whole plan. He was fairly sure, math. Grandma Rosa found the router at 6 a.m., unplugged it, and set it on the counter in front of him like evidence at a trial. "What is this?" "It's a hotspot. Grandma, listen, it's not for the register. It's actually strategic. If we can create enough ambient signal noise." "I told you, no plugs, no screens, no technology," she said, and the word came out of her like a curse. "In my kitchen." "You're the alien. You have actual spaceship technology 2 floors down. You cannot be scared of a router." "I am not scared of it. I have seen what it becomes." Her voice rose, sharper than he'd ever heard it, and something old surfaced in her face, something that had nothing to do with pizza dough. "You know what my planet had before the paste, before the efficiency boards, before flavor was legislated out of food. They had this, exactly this, every meal optimized, every process automated for maximum output, minimum feeling. I watched a civilization trade taste for convenience, one small, reasonable upgrade at a time. And every single upgrade sounded exactly like what you just said to me. Strategic, efficient. I have had 60 years of gray paste to think about how that happens, Daniel, and it happens exactly like this, one router at a time." Danny opened his mouth, then closed it. "You don't get to lecture me about the future," she went on, quieter now, "when I have already seen where it goes. And you don't get to just freeze everything at 1961 because you're scared of what comes after." He hadn't meant to raise his voice either, but there it was. "You've got 2 federal agents in a windbreaker eating your pizza and mapping your basement, Grandma, and your entire plan is a turkey baster and hope. Some of us actually know how signal jamming works. Some of us have spent our whole lives learning the thing you refuse to even touch." The kitchen went very quiet. Outside, the 6 a.m. bread delivery truck rattled past, indifferent to either of them. "Get out," she said, but there wasn't much heat left in it. "Go clear your head. Come back when you're less insufferable." He went. He walked, actually, all the way out past the old mill gates, past the pink flag on the smokestack, and stood there for a long time, looking at the building his grandmother had watched go from everything to nothing over the course of one American lifetime, not counting the other lifetime she'd lived before that, on a planet that had made the opposite mistake. He came back 4 hours later with 2 coffees and, notably, no router. They didn't apologize, exactly. That wasn't how it worked between them. Instead, Grandma Rosa handed him a coffee mug she'd clearly reheated for him 3 separate times and said, "Sit, I want to show you something," and pulled out, from a drawer Danny had never once seen opened, a photograph, actual paper curling at the edges, of the Millhaven steelworks in 1958, lit up at night, smoke pouring proudly out of every stack. 5,000 men shift-changing at once, like the tide coming in. "I watched this town build itself into something extraordinary," she said. "And I watched it get taken apart, piece by piece, by men in suits who called it efficiency, too. So, you'll forgive me if I flinch at the word." Danny turned the photo over in his hands. On the back, in pencil, someone had written, "Rosa and Frank, Mill Gates, before the shift. You really did fall in love with a payroll clerk. Frank had wonderful hands and terrible taste in hats. Drink your coffee. He drank his coffee. Then carefully, he said, I don't want to jam a signal with brute force, actually. I've been thinking about it wrong. If their equipment is scanning for anomalous frequencies, I don't need to hide the ship's signature. I need to make Millhaven so electromagnetically weird, background noise-wise, that one more anomaly doesn't even register as anomalous. Old ham radios, bad wiring, every microwave in this town running at once. A town-wide decoy, not a jam. Grandma Rosa looked at him for a long moment, the particular look of someone recalculating a number they thought they already knew. That, she said slowly, is either the smartest thing you've ever said to me, or it is going to burn down what's left of the old steelworks. Could be both. Could be both, she agreed, and, for the first time since he'd arrived that summer, she smiled at him like an equal, not a project. Go find your decoys, Daniel. I'll finish the dough. That night, after the shop was closed and the dough was resting under its towel, Danny came down for a glass of water and found the cellar door already open, blue light spilling faintly up the stairs. He didn't go down. He'd learned by now when a conversation wasn't meant for him. He heard enough anyway. 2 weeks Earth time, and the window does not extend, came the flat, familiar voice, and then Grandma Rosa's, quieter than he'd ever heard it, not arguing this time, just asking. And if I'm not ready in 2 weeks? Then we just close the file. You'd stay a civilian permanently, no more recall option. It's not a punishment. It's just how it works once you stop showing up. A long pause. Is that a threat? No, it's just what happens. I don't decide it, I just tell people. Danny sat down on the top step, quietly, and did not go back to bed for a long while. Chapter 7. Too large to go. The ship, the real one, the original one, the one that had been sitting quietly inside the old Millhaven steelworks since the Eisenhower administration, turned out to be considerably more work than the console in the cellar had let on. I thought your people fixed this thing, Danny said, flat on his back on a creeper board Grandma Rosa had produced from somewhere, head first under a panel of the hull that had been peeled back like the lid of a sardine can. Isn't that the whole point of them showing up? They shipped the parts. That's what I'm entitled to. Grandma Rosa handed down a tool that looked like a wrench that had married a tuning fork. Installation costs extra, and I told them exactly where they could put their labor rate back in cycle 40. Nobody at the board is going to lift a finger for a 60-year-old coolant line just because I'm too stubborn to pay their prices. So, we're doing free labor on an alien spacecraft. Come to do the work. Young people need exercise. She crouched down next to him, peering into the guts of the panel with the calm, assessing look she usually reserved for dough that hadn't proofed correctly. Hand me that. No, the other one. The one that hums. An hour in, Danny was no longer laughing about any of it. The coolant line itself had been easy enough. A straightforward swap, the kind of job that would have taken a competent plumber 20 minutes. The problem was the regulator feeding into it, a fist-sized knot of components that looked, depending on the angle, like either a very small engine or a very confused piece of jewelry, and which had begun, over the last 20 minutes, to flash a slow, rhythmic amber light that neither Danny nor Grandma Rosa could make any sense of. It wasn't doing that before, Danny said, for the 4th time. as if repetition might change the outcome. I'm aware of what it wasn't doing before. Grandma Rosa had her reading glasses on, peering at the regulator with an expression Danny recognized from 3 weeks of watching her troubleshoot a stubborn oven. Except now, for the first time since he'd arrived, it wasn't working. It's not a language I ever learned properly. Frank's ancestors built diesel engines. Mine did not build this. So, we're stuck. We are, for the moment, extremely stuck, she admitted, which felt, to Danny, like the single most alarming sentence she'd said all summer, precisely because of how calmly she said it. The knock on the shop's back door came just after 10. "We're closed," Danny called up, wiping grease off his hands, not moving from under the panel, grateful, in a petty way, for an excuse to stop staring at the blinking amber light. "We're never closed, Grandma Rosa said, already climbing out and dusting off her knees. "Watch the regulator. Don't touch it. Don't tap it. And for the love of everything, don't unplug anything, just to see what happens." She came back down 12 minutes later, and Danny knew something was wrong before she said a word, because she came down the ladder slower than she'd gone up it. "Everything okay?" "Order for 2 larges," she said, in a voice that had gone very carefully neutral. "Extra cheese. Paid an exact change, which nobody does anymore." She paused. One of them called the other one, "We're not supposed to be doing this," and laughed about it. The exact same laugh, the exact same joke, as the 2 idiots on my console the other night who forgot to hang up the phone. Danny sat up so fast he cracked his head on the panel. "The aliens? Here? In the shop?" "Paying customers," Grandma Rosa said. 2 very ordinary-looking men in their 30s, extremely interested in the specials board. Absolutely no interest whatsoever in me. She frowned, the particular frown of someone recalculating a threat level. "Which either means they don't know who I am, or it means they know exactly who I am, and pizza was simply too good an excuse to pass up." "What do we do?" "We give them their pizza," she said, already turning back toward the stairs. Already, Danny noticed, taking off her grease-stained apron and putting on the clean one she kept for customers. "And then we watch very, very closely to see which kind of alien we're dealing with tonight. The kind that's here for cheese, or the kind that's here for me." Danny followed her up, close enough to grab her arm, if it came to that. Though he had no idea what he'd actually do if it did. The 2 men were sitting at the corner table, the one under the window, and they looked exactly as advertised. Unremarkable, 30-something, one in a windbreaker that wasn't quite the same navy as the agents, but close enough to be its own kind of joke, the other absorbed in the specials board like it contained the secrets of the universe. Which, Danny supposed, in a manner of speaking, it sort of did. Grandma Rosa set the 2 boxes down herself. 2 larges, extra cheese." "Thank you," said the one in the windbreaker, and then, a half-second too late, added, "R7." The room went very still. Grandma Rosa didn't move. "I'm sorry?" "Sorry. Force of habit," he smiled, and it was the wrong kind of smile, the kind that knew exactly what it had just done. "You go by Rosa here. That's nice. I like that." "You're off the clock," Grandma Rosa said. It wasn't a question. "We're off the clock," the second one confirmed, not looking up from the specials board. "This isn't a board visit. This is personal time. We heard about the pizza, and we came for the pizza. That's the whole story. And the board doesn't know you're here." The 2 men exchanged a look, the specific, guilty look of 2 people who had, in fact, told nobody anything, and were only now realizing what that omission might cost them. "The board," said the first one carefully, "does not currently know we are here. We would prefer to keep it that way, given the circumstances." He glanced at the door, at Danny, at the boxes, anywhere but directly at her. "We're not here to report anything, Rosa. We just wanted the pizza." "That's a very fine line you're standing on," Grandma Rosa said. "We're aware." Danny, still faintly smelling of ship coolant, cleared his throat before he could stop himself. "You two, you're with the board. The repair side, or the case processing side?" "Regulatory Maintenance Division," the second one said, a little defensively, like it was a subject he was used to being looked down on for. "We calibrate field equipment. It's very skilled work." Grandma Rosa and Danny looked at each other for exactly 1 second. "I don't suppose," Grandma Rosa said slowly, "either of you has ever seen a Series 9 flow regulator do something amber and rhythmic when it has no business doing anything at all." The two men's expressions changed almost in unison, from wary to professionally curious to something that looked, on both of them, uncannily like the face Danny made whenever somebody described a bug in code he'd written. "Amber and rhythmic," the first one repeated. "Not solid amber. Rhythmic. That's not a fault code. That's a lockout. Somebody set that thing to ignore any calibration it didn't recognize, decades ago, probably because the ship thought it was being repaired by hostile forces," the second one finished, delighted despite himself. "That's a very old security behavior. Nobody's used that in 400 cycles." "Can you fix it?" Danny asked, before he could stop himself. The two men looked at each other again, a different look this time, weighing the cost of getting involved against the plain, professional itch of a problem sitting right there, unsolved, practically begging. "It would take 4 minutes," the first one admitted. "And it would mean this whole night never happened," Grandma Rosa said. "For all of us." "That," said the second one, already standing, already wiping pizza grease off his hands onto his windbreaker. "Sounds like an excellent trade." It took him 6 minutes, not 4, and he complained the entire time about a design decision that, by his account, no competent engineer would have signed off on in this continuance or any other. But the amber light stopped blinking and steadied and went, finally, a clean and untroubled green. They paid for their pizzas in exact change, took the boxes, and left without another word. And Danny didn't breathe properly again until the bell over the door had stopped ringing. "They knew you," he said. "They actually knew you, and they just fixed it. For pizza." "Everyone from home knows me eventually," Grandma Rosa said, locking the door behind them, her hands not quite steady, even as she allowed herself something close to a real smile. "The only question that ever matters is what they decide to do about it. Tonight, apparently, the answer was a working regulator and 2 large pizzas worth of silence." Chapter 8. The agents make their move. The first real anomaly. Agent Miller's scanner picked up, on Tuesday afternoon, turned out to be Marv's tanning salon on 3rd, whose 20-year-old bulbs threw off a magnetic signature so aggressive that Miller spent 40 minutes convinced he'd found the epicenter of something historic, before Osei pointed out gently that the reading spiked every time somebody flipped the salon's open sign and dropped every time they flipped it back. Wednesday's anomaly was the bug zapper outside the Gas and Go. Miller stood in the parking lot at midnight with his scanner raised like a divining rod, absolutely certain, right up until a moth wandered too close to the wire mesh, and the whole signal resolved itself into a small, satisfying, and entirely mundane zest. "This is not," Osei said, watching Miller write bug zapper. Inconclusive, further study warranted into his notebook with real solemnity. Going well. By Thursday, though, the readings around downtown had started narrowing in a way that felt, for the first time, less like noise and more like a shape. Agent Miller had triangulated the signal to within 4 blocks of downtown Millhaven by Thursday night, which he considered, privately, the high point of a career that had otherwise consisted of chasing weather balloons across 4 states and once spending a week investigating a beaver dam. He informed his partner, Agent Osei, that they would move at 0100 hours, quietly, professionally, and, this part he emphasized twice, without alerting the local population. This plan lasted approximately 11 minutes. At 0057, the town's entire electrical grid did something the power company's actual regional office would later describe in an internal memo as an event. Every porch light on Mill Street flickered in sequence, like dominoes. Old Man Pruitt's decades-dead CB radio, dragged out of storage that afternoon at Danny's request for a town emergency drill, crackled to life and began broadcasting a trucker's conversation from 1986 that had apparently been trapped in some wire somewhere all this time. 6 microwaves, running simultaneously and without food in them, per instructions Danny had circulated door to door under the heading Emergency Community Signal Drill. Ask Rosa's Pizzeria for details. Turned half of downtown into a very localized, very confusing wall of electromagnetic noise. Agent Osei's scanner, which 40 minutes earlier had shown one clean, promising anomaly 4 blocks from the pizzeria, now showed 41 anomalies spread across the entire downtown grid, updating every few seconds, none of them holding still long enough to triangulate. "What is happening?" said Agent Osei, in the flat voice of a man watching his career, best lead dissolve into static. "I don't know," said Agent Miller, "but I don't like it," which was, Danny would later think, a fairly reasonable 1-sentence review of the entire town of Millhaven that week. The agents pivoted to a ground search, which is how, at 1:20 a.m., 2 men in windbreakers found themselves standing on the cracked concrete apron outside the old Millhaven steelworks, flashlights out, directly above the exact spot Grandma Rosa's ship sat hidden inside the mill's old foundry floor, and directly in the middle of a full dress rehearsal for the opening number of Millhaven's first ever Alien Days Festival, a week and a half out now and, per the banner strung between 2 floodlights, a celebration of our visitors, whoever they are. 42 members of the Senior Center's dance troupe, it turned out, had been rehearsing at the steelworks lot every night that week. Mrs. Alberghetti had volunteered them for the festival's opening number the moment Gary Pell finished his announcement, and had appointed herself choreographer on the strength of 40 years running the church talent show. She was not about to let a little thing like a federal investigation cost her dancers their blocking. They descended on the lot at 1:22 a.m. in matching silver windbreakers, costumes, not uniforms, though Danny didn't find that out until later, with a boom box, a folding table of lemon bars for the midpoint break, and absolutely zero tolerance for 2 strange men standing exactly where the big finale kick line was supposed to go. "You're in the formation," said Mrs. Alberghetti, 79 years old, and built like a woman who had once wrestled a Buick out of a snowbank by herself. "Everybody's in formation by 1:30. That's the rule. We're a week and a half out. We do not have time." "Ma'am, we're conducting a federal—" "You can conduct it in the formation," said Mrs. Alberghetti, and put a lemon bar in Agent Osei's hand with the finality of a woman closing a bank vault. What followed, over the next 40 minutes, was less a covert operation and more a hostage situation staged entirely by elderly festival performers who did not know they were hostage takers. Every time Miller attempted to walk his scanner toward the mill's old loading dock, he was redirected, gently but immovably, back into formation for the next run-through. Osei, trying to radio Miller from the far side of the lot, was intercepted by a retired dentist named Carl, who wanted very badly to discuss whether Osei thought the finale should end on a kick line or a freeze pose. At one point, Miller's flashlight was mistaken for a prop and confiscated by a woman rehearsing a solo that involved, as far as Danny could tell, interpretive jazz hands. Danny watched the entire thing from the pizzeria's dark upstairs window with Grandma Rosa beside him, both of them drinking decaf, neither of them saying a word until Grandma Rosa finally exhaled something that might have been a laugh if she'd let it all the way out. "I did not plan the festival," she admitted. "I know. Neither did I." "Sometimes," she said, watching Mrs. Alberghetti spin Agent Miller directly away from the loading dock for the third time in 6 minutes, "a town just looks out for its own, even when it doesn't know why." "Or maybe it does know why," Danny said, watching Carl try, for the second time, to explain the kick line to Osei. "Maybe this is just their way of holding on to the old good days a little longer, even if those days are long gone." Rosa puckered her lips, saying nothing, and kept watching the lot below. By 2:15 a.m., the agents retreated to their van, defeated, smelling faintly of lemon bar, having gathered no usable data and one entirely unwanted spot in the festival program, which Mrs. Alberghetti had penciled Miller into for participating. Danny turned to his grandmother. "That won't hold them forever." "No," she agreed, "but it held them tonight. Tonight was the part I needed." Chapter 9. Everything has its price. It didn't hold forever. 2 days later, Agent Miller, humiliated, lemon bar scented, and now personally invested in a way that had stopped being about his career and started being about pride, requisitioned a second van, a real scanner instead of the one that had apparently been calibrated by an intern, and a warrant that named the steelworks grounds specifically. It might have worked too if half of Millhaven hadn't shown up on their own before the agents got there. Word travels strangely in a small town. Nobody could later agree on exactly how the story got out, whether it was Danny's microwave drill that tipped people off, or Mrs. Alberghetti mentioning to her book club that the nice pizza family seems to be having some trouble with the government, or simply that 300 people who'd already decided this was the most interesting thing to happen to Millhaven in 30 years were not about to let it end with 2 men in a van digging into the old steelworks floor without a show. Whatever the reason, by the time Miller arrived with his warrant, he found not a quiet, abandoned lot, but a crowd, a genuine, unchoreographed, deeply Millhaven crowd, holding UFO loop tour signs, eating pizza, and standing without any coordination at all, directly between the agents and the foundry floor. Gary Pell, the mayor, stood at the front, holding what turned out to be a genuinely valid town ordinance about advance notice required for excavation on municipal property, which he read aloud, in full, twice, very slowly, while the crowd cheered every subsection. It wasn't a dance rehearsal this time. It was simpler than that. It was 300 people who had watched outsiders take the mill, take the jobs, take 30 years of efficiency, deciding, without a formal vote, that whatever this was, whatever was under that parking lot, was theirs to decide about. Not two men in windbreakers. Agent Osei, watching the crowd, turned to Miller and said something Danny only heard secondhand, from Deb at the diner, who'd been standing close enough. "Sir, I think we need to reconsider the value proposition of this assignment relative to our actual authorization." Which was, Danny gathered, government for let's go home. They left, not forever. There'd be reports filed, and reports about the reports, and Danny suspected this wasn't the last Millhaven would hear from the Office of Non-Terrestrial Material Acquisition. But for now, for that night, the parking lot stayed exactly as buried as it had been. Grandma Rosa found Danny afterward, sitting on the pizzeria's back step, and sat down next to him without a word for a while. "They'll be back," Danny finally said. "Probably. Bureaucracies rarely give up. They just get bored and reassigned." She looked up at the sky. The same look Danny had caught her giving it that first night, except now he understood it. "That's not the part I'm thinking about." "What's the part you're thinking about?" She was quiet for a long moment. "The board called again while you were handling your microwave situation," she said. "The repairs finished, fully finished. The window's down to 6 days now. No more asking for extensions. No more some things to finish first." She turned the mug in her hands, not drinking from it. "And the rule's the same rule it's always been. You heard it yourself, that first night in the cellar. No organic material leaves a quarantine-class world. Not seeds, not soil, not—" She exhaled, and it came out smaller than Danny had ever heard her sound. "Not a recipe, not dough, not 60 years of knowing exactly how long to let a starter breathe before it's ready. I suppose I'd let myself hope they'd make an exception. They don't make exceptions. That's rather the point of them." Danny sat with that. "So, you go back," he said slowly, "and it's paced again. Forever." "So I go back," she agreed, "and it's paced again, forever." She finally looked at him. "And I leave this, the shop, the town, you." "Then why come back?" Danny tried to sound calm about it and didn't quite manage. "You still have family here. Me, obviously. My mom, even if she's always buried in her mineral research." "Oh boy, I know your mother. Believe me." A small, tired smile crossed her face. "But Frank always wanted to see my hometown after we got married. He never asked too many questions about where I was really from, never minded, never pushed. He just wanted to know more of me, in whatever pieces I was willing to give him. I told him someday I'd take him, and then someday kept not arriving, the way it does, and then he was gone, and I never got the chance." She looked toward the door, not quite at Danny anymore. "I suppose some part of this is me keeping a promise I made a long time ago, just very late, and to nobody who can still collect on it." Neither of them said anything else for a long time. Down the street, someone had left the UFO tour banner up, flapping gently in a warm summer wind that smelled, faintly, of wood smoke and basil, and neither of those things had any business existing on the planet she said she was from. Chapter 10. Operation Pizza Smuggle. "No organic material," Danny repeated the next morning, pacing the kitchen while Grandma Rosa kneaded dough with more force than the recipe strictly called for. Okay, fine. So, we don't take organic material. Daniel, I appreciate the energy, but I've had 60 years and considerably more sleep than you to think about this, and the law is the law. The law says no organic material. It doesn't say anything about information. She stopped kneading. A recipe, Danny said, talking faster now, the way he did when an idea was outrunning his mouth, is just information. Ratios, temperatures, timing, technique. That's not dough, that's data. And the one thing I actually know how to do, the one useful skill I have that you've spent 3 weeks telling me is a load-bearing wall away from useless, is turn things into data. Grandma Rosa wiped her hands slowly on her apron, watching him the way she'd watched the crowd in the parking lot the night before, recalculating, again, a number she thought she already knew. Keep talking. What followed was, by Danny's own admission, the single strangest 6 days of his professional life, and he'd once done a 2-month rotation in corporate compliance. They filmed everything. Grandma Rosa's hands in extreme close-up, folding dough at 40 different stages, with Danny narrating temperature, humidity, the specific gave of the dough under her palm that she'd never once been able to explain in words, but could demonstrate perfectly every single time. They measured. They weighed. They ran the wood-fired oven at 6 different temperatures with a thermal camera Danny borrowed from a cousin who did HVAC work, mapping the exact, unrepeatable heat gradient of a 100-year-old brick oven that Grandma Rosa swore and Danny privately suspected was itself slightly alien adjacent by now. It's not just numbers, she warned him more than once, watching him build spreadsheets at the kitchen table late into the night. You can write down every measurement I have and still burn it. There's a feeling. There's knowing when the dough is telling you something. Then we film the feeling too, Danny said, and meant it, and spent an entire night trying to get her to articulate, on camera, exactly what a good dough felt like, until she finally grabbed his hand, pressed it into the dough herself, and said, That's what it feels like. Now you know. Put that in your spreadsheet, smart boy." And Danny, laughing, had to admit that some data simply couldn't be typed. Somewhere around 2 a.m, elbow deep in her 40th demonstration of the same fold, Grandma Rosa went quiet in a different way than tired. "Frank built that oven door," she said, out of nowhere, nodding at the hinge Danny had spent 3 weeks assuming was original to the building. Not the oven. The oven was already here, from whoever ran this place before the hardware store, before the comb man, God knows. But the door had rusted clean off, and I didn't have $2 to rub together those first years, and Frank came in one Sunday with scrap metal from the Mills Parts yard and just built one. Didn't ask if I wanted help. Just did it, the way he did most things. Did it work? Terribly the first time. Sagged on its hinge, wouldn't seal right, smoked out half of Mill Street. She almost smiled at the memory. He rebuilt it 4 times before he got it right, never once complained. Just kept coming back with more scrap. She looked down at her own hands in the dough, decades of the same motion. I think that was the exact week I decided to marry him. Not the flowers, not the dancing, the 4th oven door. Danny didn't say anything, mostly because he didn't trust his voice to do anything useful with that. Anyway, Grandma Rosa cleared her throat, businesslike again, and folded the dough one more time for the camera. Put that in your data file too, if you can find a way. 60 years of a stubborn man's scrap metal is probably the real recipe if anyone ever bothered to ask. The final format, after 2 discarded attempts, one involving an MP3 file of Grandma humming the rhythm she used for kneading, encoded frame by frame into what Danny hoped would read, to whatever scanning equipment Intergalactic Customs used, as pure abstract information rather than a recipe, was a single dense data file. Temperatures, ratios, timing, video, sound, and buried at the very center of it, in a format Danny was fairly sure violated at least one Earth copyright law, and possibly several galactic ones. 60 years of a woman's hands doing the one thing she'd crossed the universe to learn how to do. They loaded it onto a small silver drive that Grandma Rosa produced from the same drawer as the photograph of the mill. A drive that looked, Danny thought, suspiciously like it had been sitting there for decades, waiting for exactly this. "You had this the whole time," he said. "I had hope the whole time," she corrected. "I just never had a reason to use it until you showed up asking annoying questions about my point-of-sale system." The customs question, whether information as opposed to material would actually pass whatever scan her people used, remained unresolved right up until the morning of departure, when Grandma Rosa marched down into the cellar, drive in hand, and asked the humming freezer-shaped console a question in that syllable-heavy language, and waited and got an answer that made her laugh out loud for the first time in the entire 6 days. "Well?" Danny asked. "Apparently," she said, wiping her eyes, "information is exempt, has been for centuries. Nobody ever thought to smuggle a feeling before. We may have just invented a loophole an entire civilization missed for 400 years because nobody on my planet has cared enough about anything to try. So, it's legal." "It's legal," she confirmed, tucking the drive into a pocket sewn, Danny now realized, specifically for this purpose, in an apron she must have made years, maybe decades, before either of them had known it would ever be needed. Which is a shame, in a way. I was rather looking forward to being a criminal. Chapter 11. Farewell and a New Beginning. It was, of all nights, the opening night of the Alien Days Festival. 3 weeks of rehearsal finally paying off in a stage full of choreographed windbreakers and a banner nobody had bothered to take down from the steelworks lot, still reading a celebration of our visitors, whoever they are, flapping over a lot that had no idea how literally it was about to earn that sentence. Agent Miller, it turned out, was not quite finished. He showed up at the edge of the steelworks lot at 4:20 a.m. Alone this time, Osei having quietly requested reassignment 2 days earlier, citing, in his formal transfer paperwork, a strong personal need for a case that does not involve senior citizens. With a scanner in one hand and the specific, glassy-eyed determination of a man who had nothing left to lose professionally and had decided, as a result, to lose it anyway. "There's still a reading out here," he announced to nobody in particular, since nobody in particular was listening. "I don't care what it costs me. I'm not leaving Millhaven without proof." Danny saw him first from the pizzeria's back step and swore quietly enough that Grandma Rosa didn't ask him to repeat it. "We don't have time to out-clever him again," she said. "The ship's due in under half an hour." "Then we don't out-clever him," Danny said, already moving. "We give him something to find." What he gave Agent Miller, 7 frantic minutes later, was the 7-foot inflatable UFO the tour company had been using outside the gift shop all month. the same cartoon design from the flyer, oval-shaped, cheese yellow, with a crude gray alien face grinning out from underneath it, hastily wired to a leaf blower, a car battery, and every string of Christmas lights old man Pruitt had left over from the hardware store's holiday display, and hauled at a dead run to the exact opposite corner of the lot from where the real ship sat waiting. It rose about 4 feet off the ground, wobbling, glowing an alarming shade of nacho cheese yellow, and made a sound, somewhere between a leaf blower and a dying accordion, that Danny would later describe as not our best work, but our fastest. Agent Miller's scanner lit up like a slot machine. He turned, saw the glowing, wobbling, unmistakably pizza-shaped shape rising against the dark, and let out a sound Danny had never heard a grown man make outside of a horror movie. "That's it!" Miller screamed, already running toward it, arms out, as if he might personally tackle it out of the sky. "That's the..." The inflatable UFO chose that exact moment to catch a gust of wind, spin sideways, and deflate with a long, undignified wheeze, collapsing into a heap of cheese-yellow vinyl directly on top of Agent Miller, Christmas lights and all. By the time he'd fought his way out from under it, blinking, tangled in a string of lights shaped like tiny plastic peppers, every eye in Millhaven was still fixed on a deflating pizza balloon eating a federal agent, which was exactly the kind of cover a ship full of last-minute goodbyes needed, 300 yards away in the dark. "That," Grandma Rosa said, watching from the pizzeria steps, "is the best money I have ever not spent on marketing." The ship rose out of the old Millhaven steelworks before dawn, punching a clean, silent hole through what was left of the roof, which meant the tour company would need a very creative explanation for why the landing site now had an actual crater in it. The town spent the next decade calling it, entirely without irony now, the landing site, capital letters earned at last, and charging tourists $2 to look at it. Half of Millhaven came anyway, at that hour, in bathrobes and work boots, and, in a few cases, still in their festival costumes from a few hours before. Because word travels strangely in a small town, and because some things, even things nobody quite understood, deserved a send-off. Grandma Rosa stood at the edge of the crater in her good coat, the one she wore to funerals and, apparently, spaceship departures, holding Danny's hands in both of hers. "The shop is yours," she said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't really a surprise either. They'd both known, without saying it, for days now, where this was heading. "The recipe's on the drive, but you don't need the drive. You've had your hands in that dough for 3 weeks. You know the feeling now. That's the part that matters." "I don't know how to run a restaurant that refuses to modernize." "Then modernize it, properly this time. Not a router shoved in a drawer at 6 in the morning. A real plan. You're good at plans when you're not doing them behind my back." She almost smiled. "Keep the oven, keep the recipe. Everything else is yours to decide." "What about the wall?" "Leave the wall," she said. "Some things are load-bearing, whether you like it or not." Mrs. Alberghetti, off to the side, was already crying loudly enough that several other people had started too, out of solidarity more than genuine grief, since most of them had known Grandma Rosa for either 60 years or 3 weeks, and were equally unclear on what exactly they were losing. Gary Pell shook her hand and said, with the particular sincerity of a man whose insurance office had never once had to write a policy for this, "Millhaven won't forget this, Rosa." And she said, "Millhaven had better not. I've got a crater with my name on it now." And that got a real laugh out of the crowd, the first one of the night. Danny walked her right up to the edge of the light, a soft blue-white glow spilling out of a ship that had somehow gotten considerably larger since the small silver console in the basement, in the way that things which don't want to be found always turn out to be bigger than they let on, and found at the very last that he didn't have anything clever left to say. "I'll come back," she said, before he could. "I don't know when, I don't know how, but I've spent 60 years discovering that the universe has a strange sense of humor about pizza, so I'm not ruling anything out." "That's not a promise." "No," she agreed. "It's better than one. A promise is something you make because you're not sure. This is just the truth, as far as I understand it today." She kissed his forehead, the way she had every summer since he was 7, turned, and walked into the light without looking back. Because she'd told him once, years before any of this, about something else entirely. Looking back was how you talked yourself out of things worth doing. The ship lifted at 4:47 a.m., silent, no engine roar, no dramatic wind, just a shape rising through the dark, and then simply not being there anymore, the way a held breath isn't there once you let it go. By sunrise, the crater had a folding table set up next to it, run by Gary Pell's teenage daughter, selling coffee and, at Danny's insistence, the first batch of pizza made under new management. Same oven, same wall, same load-bearing everything. Dough kneaded by hands that finally, after 3 weeks, knew exactly what they were doing. The sign out front still said, "Rosa's." Danny had already decided it always would. Chapter 12, Epilogue. Alien Pizza, Pop-Up. Somewhere else, a great many light years else, on a planet whose name still doesn't translate cleanly, under a sky that had never once needed to invent the color of a sunset because nobody there had thought to ask for one. A small, unauthorized establishment opened in a converted nutrient paste dispensary, run by a woman recently returned from an extended, technically still under review repair leave. The efficiency board sent an inspector on opening day, intending to shut the whole operation down within the hour on grounds of unjustified sensory indulgence and non-standard caloric delivery format. The inspector, a stern, thin, entirely reasonable civil servant who had eaten gray paste 3 times a day for 400 cycles without complaint, accepted a slice purely for evaluation purposes, purely to document the violation properly. He ordered a second slice 40 seconds later. He did not file the report that day, or the next. By the end of the month, there was a line down the block, the first line in recorded planetary history that anyone had ever willingly stood in for something that wasn't mandatory. The efficiency board convened an emergency session, produced several strongly worded documents, and then, 3 sessions later, quietly amended a 400-year-old flavor ordinance by exactly 1 clause, which some considered progress and others considered the beginning of the end of civilization as they knew it. Grandma Rosa considered it, privately, the best thing she had ever accomplished, better even than the wood-fired oven, better even than the shop back on the little planet she still thought of, some nights, looking up at an unfamiliar sky, as home, just a different one now than the one she'd been born to. Back on Earth, Rosa's Pizzeria had become, against every economic law Danny had once studied, and now largely ignored, the reason Millhaven was still on the map. The old steelworks had been converted, not into a tech park, not into luxury lofts, but into a genuine, modest, town-run museum about the mill years. The actual crater roped off out back and kept exactly as it was, under a small sign that finally, truthfully, read, "The Landing Site." With a gift shop that sold, next to postcards of the smokestacks, a small commemorative pizza box reading, "Out of this crust, Millhaven's own." Every so often, never predictably, never with warning, a small package arrived at the shop with no return address, no stamps Danny recognized, and a customs mark that, when he'd once shown it to a postal worker in the nearest big city out of curiosity, had made the man go very quiet and ask where, exactly, Danny had gotten it. Inside was always the same thing, a single, carefully preserved slice of something that was almost pizza, made with ingredients that were almost tomato and almost cheese and almost wheat, adapted, Danny assumed, from whatever the local chemistry allowed 60-some light years from here. The tomato had a faint metallic note no amount of data could have fixed, and the cheese never quite pulled the way real mozzarella did, stretching instead in strange, angular threads that looked more engineered than melted. The unmistakable fingerprint of a planet that had never grown these things properly to begin with, only reconstructed them as closely as the file allowed. And yet, underneath all of that, every single time, the timing was right. The fold was right. Whatever it was in his grandmother's hands that Danny had once tried to put into a spreadsheet, that had survived the trip perfectly, translated and retranslated across a language and a chemistry that had no business preserving it at all, and it was, every time, absolutely delicious. He kept every box. He never told anyone what was really in them, except once, to a delivery driver who leaned in and asked, half joking, "What is that? Some kind of secret family recipe?" Danny thought about that for a moment, standing behind the counter his grandmother had stood behind for 60 years, in a shop that would never, under his ownership, get a 10th table, because some things really were load-bearing. "Something like that," he said, and went back to the oven. The end.